The desert sun beat down mercilessly on the rocky outcrop, where Sarah Whitman lay motionless. Her weathered face, partially covered by a tactical mesh scarf, betrayed no emotion as she peered through the Schmidt and Bender PM2 scope mounted on her M40A5 rifle. The heat rising from the sand created rippling waves in her sight picture, a mirage effect that would challenge a lesser marksman. But Sarah was no ordinary shooter. At 46, Sarah's body bore the marks of 2 decades in special operations, a thin scar above her right eyebrow, calloused hands that had pulled the trigger on 72 confirmed kills, and eyes that had seen more death than most battlefield surgeons. Her breathing remained steady, controlled just as she had trained countless recruits back at Fort Bragg. 1.3 miles away, a figure moved between abandoned buildings in what had once been a mining settlement. The target, a high-value terrorist operative, was unaware of his impending fate. Sarah's finger rested gently against the trigger guard, not yet applying pressure, waiting for the perfect moment. "Conditions," she whispered to no one. Through years of solitary missions, Sarah had developed the habit of talking herself through the process, a ritual that kept her focused. Her mind calculated wind speed, temperature, humidity, and the minute adjustments needed to land a shot at this extreme distance. 7-mile-per-hour wind right to left, elevation 467 feet, temperature 104 degrees. She made micro adjustments to her scope, the precision of her movements reflecting thousands of hours of training. As the target paused near a doorway, Sarah inhaled deeply, then released half her breath, holding the remainder. The Barrett M82 roared the .50 caliber round, cutting through the desert air with devastating accuracy. Sarah watched through her scope as the target collapsed, the shot landing exactly where she had aimed. "Target down," she whispered, allowing herself a moment of professional satisfaction before beginning to disassemble her rifle. As she packed her equipment, a question echoed in her mind, one that had been haunting her for weeks. How did it come to this? Hunting the man who had made me who I am, the irony wasn't lost on her. 73 confirmed kills. And the last one might have to be Colonel Jack Morgan, the man who had taught her everything she knew. Fort Bragg sprawled across the North Carolina landscape like a small city, its training grounds echoing with the sounds of America's elite warriors honing their craft. The sniper school stood apart, a place where patience and precision were valued above all else. In the primary classroom, 24 recruits sat ramrod straight as Sarah paced before them. The walls were adorned with photos of legendary marksmen and tactical diagrams showing the physics of long-distance shooting. A sniper's greatest weapon isn't his rifle. Sarah's voice carried authority born of experience. It's patience. The willingness to lie in the same position for days if necessary, to urinate in your pants, rather than move to control every muscle in your body until the perfect moment arrives. Her eyes scanned the room, noting the skepticism on some faces. Even in 2025, a female sniper instructor raised eyebrows among certain recruits. Some of you are wondering what a woman can teach you about combat marksmanship. A knowing smile crossed her face. That's fine. Doubt me all you want. But remember, I've put more high-value targets in the ground than most of you have put rounds downrange. Sarah picked up a worn M40A5 from the table beside her, handling it with the familiarity of an old friend. This was my first deployment rifle. Afghanistan 2005. Ask me how many confirmed kills it has registered. The room remained silent, the challenge hanging in the air. 47. She answered her own question. Which means I'm either very good or very lucky. After 20 years, luck runs out. From the back of the room, a gruff voice interrupted, or maybe the targets weren't shooting back. Sarah's smile didn't waver as Colonel Jack Morgan entered the classroom. At 63, Jack remained imposing, his frame still solid despite his age. Silver hair cut military short, accentuated piercing blue eyes that had seen the end of the Cold War Panama Desert Storm and countless classified operations that would never make the history books. "Colonel Morgan," Sarah acknowledged with a respectful nod. "Class, this is the man who taught me everything I know about the art of the kill shot. Former commander of Special Operations Detachment Delta and the finest marksman I've ever met." Jack approached, his weathered boots echoing on the polished floor. "Don't let her modesty fool you," he addressed the class. "Specialist Whitman here holds the third longest confirmed kill in U.S. military history, 1 mile 743 yards, through a sandstorm. the room filled with murmurs of appreciation. Even the skeptics straightened in their seats. What Specialist Whitman won't tell you, Jack continued, is that she made that shot after lying in position for 63 hours without sleep with 3 cracked ribs from an earlier engagement using a rifle that had been damaged and field repaired. Jack's eyes met Sarah's, a moment of silent communication passing between them. Their relationship had evolved from adversarial to respectful over 20 years, but the tension never fully disappeared. Today's lesson, Jack took over, is about adapting. The enemy adapts, the environment adapts, the mission parameters adapt, and a sniper who can't adapt becomes a casualty. He turned to Sarah. Specialist Whitman, I need to borrow you for a moment. Pentagon business. Sarah nodded to her assistant instructor to continue the class before following Jack into the hallway. The colonel's demeanor changed immediately once they were alone, his voice dropping to a near whisper. We have a situation. Thomas Reynolds has gone rogue. The name hit Sarah like a physical blow. Thomas the Ghost Reynolds, one of America's most decorated covert operatives, a legend in the intelligence community. That's not possible, she responded automatically. Jack handed her a classified folder. Satellite imagery from last week. Reynolds meeting with known terrorist financiers in Dubai. Intel confirms he sold information on our nuclear monitoring stations in the Middle East. Sarah studied the grainy photos, her mind racing. Thomas wouldn't do this. There has to be another explanation. That's what I said. Jack's voice carried a hint of bitterness. But the evidence is mounting. Encrypted transfers to offshore accounts. Meetings with former KGB operatives. The Pentagon believes he's preparing for something big. Sarah closed the folders, her expression guarded. What does this have to do with me? They want you to lead a team to find him and neutralize the threat. The euphemism hung heavy between them. Neutralize, terminate, kill. Why me? Sarah asked, though she already knew the answer. Because you're the best, Jack said simply, and because Reynolds respects you. If anyone can get close enough to end this cleanly, it's you. Sarah leaned against the wall, memories flooding back. He was your friend Jack. 20 years in the field together. Operation Checkmate, Berlin, Panama. You really believe he turned? Jack's face hardened. What I believe doesn't matter. We have our orders. For a moment, Sarah saw through the professional veneer to the conflict beneath. Jack and Thomas had been more than colleagues. They were brothers in arms, sharing secrets and burdens that few could understand. When do we deploy? She asked finally. You select your team today. Wheels up at 0600 tomorrow. This stays completely off the books. As far as anyone knows, you're conducting a special training exercise in Nevada. Sarah nodded, already mentally assembling her team. I want David Young. Jack raised an eyebrow. The rookie, he's barely completed qualification. He has the best natural aptitude I've seen in a decade. Plus he's unknown to Reynolds. That could be an advantage. Your call. Who else? James Lawson for weapons and tactical. Marcus Reed for tracking and surveillance. Jack nodded approvingly. Solid choices. I'll handle the paperwork. As he turned to leave, Sarah called after him. Jack, are you on this mission too? The colonel paused. Let's just say I have a vested interest in how this plays out. Reynolds and I go back too far for me to sit this one out. With that cryptic response, he disappeared down the corridor, leaving Sarah alone with her thoughts and a mission that felt wrongs in every way. The shooting range echoed with the crack of precision rifles as Sarah approached David Young. At 27, David represented the new generation of special operations, tech-savvy, adaptable, but lacking the patience that defined true snipers. His sandy brown hair was cut regulation short, his lean frame coiled with the energy of youth. Permission to speak freely, ma'am, David asked as Sarah took position beside him on always. My grouping's still opening up after the 20th round. I can't figure out what I'm doing differently. Sarah examined his target through binoculars. You're anticipating recoil. By round 20, fatigue sets in, and you're tensing your shoulder microseconds before pulling the trigger. She handed him a fresh magazine. Try again. This time focus on your breathing. Let the shot surprise you. David reloaded and took aim. His next 5 shots formed a tight cluster in the center mass. Better? Sarah nodded. How would you like to put those skills to real use? David lowered his rifle, curiosity evident in his expression. Ma'am, I'm assembling a team for a classified operation. High risk, high priority. I need someone with your skill set. With all due respect, Specialist Whitman, I'm still in training. Surely there are more experienced snipers available. Sarah studied him carefully. Experience isn't everything, young. Sometimes fresh eyes see what veterans miss. Besides, you have something most snipers lack. What's that? Adaptability. You don't get locked into patterns. That might save our lives where we're going. David straightened, pride evident in his posture. When do we deploy Barrow 600 tomorrow? Pack for desert conditions. Extended mission. As David acknowledged the order, Sarah's mind drifted back 20 years to her first real mission. She had been younger than David, filled with the same eagerness to prove herself. That mission had changed everything. 20 years earlier, the qualification course for special operations had never been attempted by a woman before Sarah Whitman. At 26, she had already distinguished herself as a marksman, but the skepticism surrounding her application was palpable. This isn't about equality, Whitman Commander Jack Morgan had told her bluntly during her initial interview. This is about combat effectiveness. The enemy won't go easy on you because you are female, and neither will this training. I don't expect special treatment, sir, she had replied. Just a fair chance. Jack's laugh had been devoid of humor. Fair nothing about combat is fair. Men stronger than you have washed out of this program. Men with more experience. Men with more natural aptitude. Then they weren't strong enough, sir. Something in her response had given Jack pause. We'll see. The training had been brutally demanding. 72 hours without sleep. Forced marches through swamps with full gear. Combat simulations under extreme conditions. And through it all, Jack Morgan had pushed her harder than any other candidate, watching for the slightest sign of weakness. The breaking point came during the final qualification shoot. After nearly washing out from exhaustion, Sarah had stepped up to the firing line. Her hands trembled from fatigue, her vision blurred from lack of sleep. This is where it ends, Whitman, Jack had said quietly, standing behind her. No shame in recognizing your limits. Sarah had said nothing, focusing instead on her breathing. The target stood at 800 yards, a challenging shot, even under ideal conditions. She squeezed the trigger, bullseye, and then another, and another, 10 consecutive shots, all within the center ring. When she finished, Jack had stared at the target in disbelief. How? You were right, sir, Sarah had replied, her voice steady despite her exhaustion. Nothing about combat is fair, so I trained under unfair conditions. I practiced shooting after running until I vomited. I learned to control my heartbeat when I could barely stand, because the enemy won't care if I'm tired. It was the first time she had seen respect in Jack Morgan's eyes. You might make it after all, Whitman. The memory faded as Sarah finished briefing James Lawson and Marcus Reed on their upcoming mission. At 50, James was the veteran of the group, a weapons specialist with encyclopedic knowledge of every firearm system used by friend and foe alike. His thick forearms were decorated with faded tattoos from his early days in the service, and his perpetual 5 o'clock shadow gave him the appearance of a man always ready for action. Marcus, 38, had come from military intelligence before transferring to field operations. His specialty was surveillance and tracking, with a particular talent for predicting target movement based on minimal information. Where James was all hard edges and directness, Marcus was quiet calculation. So we're hunting the ghost, James summarized, referencing Thomas Reynolds by his operational nickname. Never thought I'd see the day. Marcus remained silent, processing the information with his analytical mind. This doesn't leave this room, Sarah emphasized. As far as anyone knows, we're conducting desert training exercises. Who's running point on this? James asked. CIA, Pentagon. Officially no one. We're off the books. Marcus finally spoke. That's unusual for a high-value target, especially one with Reynolds' connections. Sarah nodded. There's concern about how deep this goes. If Reynolds has turned, he might not be alone. Or, James interjected, someone wants him eliminated quietly because he knows too much. The possibility hung in the air, unacknowledged but understood by all three veterans. They had seen enough of the intelligence world to know that operations were rarely as straightforward as their briefings suggested. We deploy at 0600, Sarah concluded. Pack for 2 weeks minimum. Nevada desert, extreme conditions. As the men departed to prepare, Sarah remained behind, staring at the file containing Thomas Reynolds' service record. 26 years of distinguished service, combat decorations from multiple theaters, one of the architects of modern covert operations. What would make such a man betray everything he had fought for? The question lingered as she returned to her quarters to prepare for the mission. In her sparse living space, Sarah methodically laid out her equipment. Each item had been selected through years of field experience. Custom-fitted ghillie suit designed for desert conditions, modified M40A5 sniper rifle with enhanced optics backup, Sig Sauer P226 survival kit optimized for arid environments and communication equipment secured against interception. As she packed, a knock sounded at her door. "Enter," she called without looking up. Colonel Jack Morgan stepped inside carrying a weathered leather case. He set it on her bed without comment. Sarah paused. "What's this insurance?" Jack replied cryptically. She unlatched the case to reveal a vintage KA bar combat knife in pristine condition. The leather handle was worn smooth from use, but the blade remained perfectly honed. "This was yours in Desert Storm." She recognized it immediately. Jack nodded. "Reynolds knows my equipment, my tactics, my tendencies. He and I trained together, fought together. If he's gone rogue, he'll be anticipating how I operate." But he doesn't know me as well," Sarah understood. "Exactly, you're the wild card, Sarah. The one variable he can't fully predict." Jack's use of her first name rather than her rank underscored the gravity of the situation. In 20 years, he had rarely crossed that line of formality. "There's something you're not telling me," she observed, studying the older man's face. Jack hesitated, internal conflict evident in his expression. "Reynolds and I were part of something called Operation Checkmate in the late 80s. Cold War stuff, deep cover operations against Soviet intelligence in Eastern Europe. I know about Checkmate. It's in his file." "Not everything is in the file." Jack's voice dropped lower. "There were aspects of that operation that never made it into official records. Decisions made in the field that wouldn't stand up to scrutiny, even by wartime standards." Sarah set down the knife. "What kind of decisions?" "The kind that haunt you at night," Jack replied. "Reynolds was the best of us, the most committed, but also the most affected by what we did. You think that's connected to his apparent defection?" Jack's gaze drifted to the window. "The past has a way of catching up. Sometimes slowly, sometimes all at once." "Jack," Sarah's voice hardened, "if there's something I need to know before leading my team after this man, tell me now." The colonel turned back to her, his expression unreadable. "Just remember, with Thomas, nothing is ever exactly what it seems. Question everything, even orders from the top." With that cryptic warning, he left, leaving Sarah with more questions than answers. Dawn broke over Fort Bragg as the team assembled on the tarmac. A nondescript C-130 waited, engines idling its cargo bay open to receive them. No insignia, no markings. Just as Jack had promised, this mission wouldn't exist on paper. David Young arrived first, his eagerness evident despite the early hour. He carried his gear in a standard-issue rucksack, his sniper rifle case slung over one shoulder. "First combat deployment?" Sarah asked as they waited for the others. David nodded. "Yes, ma'am. Training exercises only until now." "Nervous?" He considered the question before answering. "Respectful of the mission, ma'am. Not nervous." Sarah appreciated his honesty. "Good. Fear gets people killed. Respect keeps them alive." James and Marcus arrived together, their expressions professional and focused. Behind them came Jack Morgan, dressed not in his usual uniform, but in tactical field gear that made him look a decade younger. "Colonel," Sarah acknowledged with surprise, "I didn't realize you were joining us in the field." "Change of plans," Jack replied, his tone brooking no argument. "Direct orders from the Pentagon. I'm to serve as mission advisor due to my history with the target." The subtext was clear. Jack was being sent to ensure the mission succeeded, regardless of any personal connection to Thomas Reynolds. The team boarded in silence, each member lost in their own thoughts as the aircraft taxied for takeoff. As the C-130 climbed into the dawn sky, Sarah reviewed the mission parameters one final time. Their destination was a remote area of the Nevada desert where satellite imagery had detected signs of Reynolds' presence. The region, once used for nuclear testing during the Cold War, was now largely abandoned, save for a few mining operations and the occasional military training exercise. Their orders were simple: on paper, locate and neutralize Thomas Reynolds before he could pass more sensitive information to hostile entities. In reality, Sarah knew nothing about this mission would be simple. As the eastern seaboard gave way to the vast American heartland below, Sarah studied the intelligence packet again. Something about the satellite images bothered her, though she couldn't immediately identify what. Reynolds was too experienced to be caught so easily on surveillance. He knew better than to expose himself unless he wanted to be seen, she murmured. What was that? Jack asked from the seat beside her. Sarah pointed to the satellite photo. These images. Reynolds is standing in the open midday, no cover. That's not how he operates. Jack studied the image. Maybe he's getting sloppy. Thomas Reynolds doesn't get sloppy, Sarah countered. He's setting something up. Or setting someone up, Jack agreed. Question is who? The aircraft banked slightly, beginning its long journey westward. In the cargo hold, David cleaned his rifle with methodical precision, while James and Marcus reviewed topographical maps of the target area. Tell me about Reynolds, Sarah requested quietly. Not what's in the file. The man. Jack was silent for a long moment, gathering his thoughts. Thomas is the most naturally gifted operator I've ever seen. Intuitive understanding of human psychology. Could read a situation faster than anyone. Perfect memory for details. What drove him? Initially patriotism, pure and simple. Grew up during the height of the Cold War. Father was military intelligence. Thomas believed in the mission with almost religious fervor. And later, Jack's expression darkened. Berlin changed him, 1989. We were tracking a suspected mole in our Berlin station. High-level leak, someone feeding the Soviets information on our agents behind the Iron Curtain. We identified the traitor, but before we could act, 5 of our assets in East Germany were eliminated. Reynolds blamed himself. He blamed the system, Jack corrected. Said we'd become too bureaucratic, too concerned with politics and optics rather than getting the job done. After that, he went darker, took on missions no one else would touch. Became the ghost. Sarah absorbed this information, adding it to her mental profile of their target. And you, what changed for you after Berlin? Jack's eyes met hers, revealing a weariness that his professional demeanor usually concealed. I learned that loyalty has limits, even for the best of us. The conversation ended there as the aircraft hit turbulence, a physical reminder of the unsettled nature of their mission. The Nevada desert stretched to the horizon, a seemingly endless expanse of sand rock and scrub brush, baking under the relentless sun. The team had established their forward operating base in an abandoned mining facility, its rusted structures providing both cover from aerial surveillance and shelter from the elements. Sarah stood at the entrance of what had once been an administrative building, studying the terrain through high-powered binoculars. 3 miles to the north, a small collection of structures marked their primary search area, the location where satellite imagery had placed Reynolds 1 week earlier. Perimeter secured, Marcus reported, returning from his reconnaissance circuit. No signs of recent activity within 2 miles. Ground sensors placed at strategic approach points. Sarah nodded acknowledgement. David, I want observation posts established here, here, and here. She indicated points on the tactical map spread across a makeshift table. 4-hour rotations. James weapons check on all systems. Desert conditions play hell with precision mechanisms. As the team dispersed to their assignments, Jack approached. You run a tight operations specialist. Learn from the best, Sarah replied, not looking up from the map. Your assessment so far, Sarah finally met his gaze. Reynolds isn't here. Hasn't been for days. But he wants us to think he is. Jack nodded, unsurprised. What's your next move? We proceed as if we believe the intel. Set up observation, establish patterns, make ourselves visible enough to be noticed, but not so obvious as to appear suspicious. Bait, Jack summarized. Exactly. If Reynolds is watching, he'll make contact on his terms. Our job is to be ready when he does. Jack studied the younger woman with newfound appreciation. 20 years ago, she had been his student, eager to prove herself in a man's world. Now she commanded with natural authority, her tactical thinking several moves ahead of conventional approach. There's something else, Sarah continued, lowering her voice. I've been reviewing the intelligence that led us here. The timeline doesn't add up. Reynolds supposedly met with terrorist financiers 2 weeks ago, but 3 days before that, he was allegedly accessing classified nuclear monitoring data. Your point. No commercial flights match the timeline. Even private aviation couldn't have gotten him from the Pentagon to Dubai and then to Nevada in that window. Jack's expression remained neutral, but something flickered in his eyes. Assumptions about his movements could be flawed. Or, Sarah pressed, the intelligence itself is flawed, possibly deliberately. The accusation hung between them unspoken but clear. Someone wanted them to pursue Reynolds regardless of the veracity of the evidence against him. Jack checked his watch. Get your team settled. Night operations in this terrain require perfect familiarity. I'll take first watch. As he walked away, Sarah noticed the slight tension in his shoulders, the subtle tells of a man carrying a burden heavier than his official role suggested. Whatever Jack knew about Thomas Reynolds and this mission, he wasn't sharing everything. The day progressed with a methodical precision of special operations protocol. Observation posts were established, communications checked and double-checked. Weapons cleaned and prepared for the harsh desert conditions. As the sun began its descent toward the western horizon, casting long shadows across the barren landscape, Sarah gathered the team for a final briefing. Intel suggests Reynolds is operating alone, but assume he has support. He has contacts throughout the intelligence community and resources we can't anticipate. Stay alert, stay alive. David raised his hand, a gesture that reminded Sarah of his relative inexperience. Ma'am, what exactly did Reynolds take the briefing, mentioned nuclear monitoring stations, but nothing specific? Before Sarah could respond, Jack interjected from the doorway. Need to know basis young, focus on the target, not the backstory. Sarah shot Jack a questioning look, but didn't contradict him in front of the team. Get some rest. Night ops begin at 2200. As the team dispersed, Sarah pulled Jack aside. My team deserves to know what they're risking their lives for. They know enough, Jack insisted. Reynolds has critical information that could compromise national security. That's all they need to understand. What aren't you telling me, Jack? Sarah demanded quietly. First the knife, then the cryptic warnings, now this. If there's something that could affect this mission, I need to know. Jack's expression hardened. You have your orders, Specialist Whitman. Carry them out. He turned to leave, but Sarah grabbed his arm. 20 years ago, you taught me that a leader protects their team by giving them all the information they need to survive. What changed? For a moment, the mask slipped and Sarah glimpsed genuine conflict in the older man's eyes. Sometimes Sarah knowing too much is more dangerous than knowing too little. With that enigmatic response, he departed, leaving Sarah with the unsettling feeling that they were all pawns in a game whose rules remained hidden. Night transformed, the desert temperatures plummeting as stars blanketed the sky in breathtaking clarity. Sarah and David took position on a ridge overlooking the abandoned structures where Reynolds had allegedly been spotted. Their ghillie suits modified for nighttime desert conditions and rendered them nearly invisible against the rocky terrain. Through her night vision scope, Sarah methodically scanned the area, noting potential hiding spots, lines of sight, and escape routes. Beside her, David remained silent, following her example with disciplined patience that belied his youth. What do you see? Sarah asked after 20 minutes of observation. David hesitated before answering. The buildings are positioned for maximum defensive coverage. Anyone approaching from the main access points would be exposed. But there's a blind spot to the southeast where the terrain creates a natural corridor. Good, Sarah nodded. What else? Recent vehicle tracks, not military pattern. Civilian tire heavy load based on the depth of impression, and he adjusted his scope, disturbed soil near the eastern structure. Something buried or recently dug up. Sarah allowed herself a small smile of approval. The young sniper had good instincts, noticing details that most would miss. Your assessment, she prompted. Someone was here recently, not military, possibly local, but the precautions taken suggest otherwise. I'd say our target was here, but left within the last 48 hours. Leaving us just enough breadcrumbs to follow, Sarah concluded. The question is, where does the trail lead? Their quiet analysis was interrupted by the sudden crackle of their radio. Overwatch. This is base. Return immediately. Emergency situation. Authentication code Sierra Tango 97. Sarah recognized Jack's voice, tense with urgency. Roger base. Overwatch returning. ETA 20 minutes. As they carefully backed away from their position, Sarah's instincts screamed warning. Something had gone wrong at base camp, something serious enough to abort their surveillance. Jack wouldn't make that call lightly. They moved through the desert night with practiced stealth, using the terrain for cover while maintaining a brisk pace. As they approached the perimeter of their base, Sarah raised a closed fist, signaling David to halt. "Something's not right," she whispered, studying the darkened structures through her night vision goggles. No movement, no perimeter guards. Protocol dictated that even in an emergency, security positions would be maintained. The complete absence of visible personnel violated fundamental operating procedure. "Stay here," she instructed David. "Cover me. If I'm not back in 5 minutes, fall back to Rally Point Alpha and wait for further instructions." Sarah approached the base with weapon ready, moving from shadow to shadow with the fluid grace of a predator. As she neared the main building, she detected the metallic scent of blood on the night air. Inside, the scene confirmed her worst fears. Marcus Reed lay motionless near the communications equipment, a single bullet wound to his head. The precision of the shot spoke of professional execution. No struggle, no warning. "David," she whispered into her radio, "approach with extreme caution. We have a man down." A thorough sweep of the base revealed no sign of James or Jack. The communications equipment had been disabled, their satellite phone missing. On the tactical map, a single playing card had been left, the Queen of Spades. The classic sniper's calling card symbolizing death, delivered from afar. Sarah's mind raced as David entered, his face paling at the sight of their fallen comrade. "Jesus," he breathed. "Who could have gotten past our perimeter?" "Someone who knew exactly where our sensors were placed," Sarah replied grimly. "Someone trained in the same tactics we use." "Reynolds?" Sarah knelt beside the map, studying the card. "Maybe. Or someone wanting us to think it was Reynolds." She carefully turned over the playing card to reveal handwritten coordinates on the back. A message, a challenge. "He's leading us somewhere," Sarah realized. "This isn't random. It's calculated." "It's a trap," David stated the obvious. "Of course it is," Sarah agreed. "The question is, why leave Marcus dead but take Jack and James? What's the purpose?" David had no answer, his training insufficient for this level of psychological warfare. Sarah made a quick decision. "We secure the base, give Marcus a proper covering, and prepare to move at first light. Those coordinates are approximately 20 miles northeast of here. Rough terrain, minimal cover." "We're still pursuing?" David asked, surprise evident in his voice. Sarah checked her weapon, her expression hardening into resolute determination. "Reynolds just made this personal. He's challenging me directly. If he wants to play hunter and hunted, I'm game." What she didn't say was the fear gnawing at her core. Jack Morgan had disappeared along with James. Either he had been taken against his will, or the alternative was too disturbing to contemplate. If Jack was somehow complicit in this, the entire mission had been compromised from the start. As the desert night enveloped them in its cold embrace, Sarah faced the grim reality that they were no longer the hunters. They had become the hunted. And somewhere in the vast Nevada wasteland, Thomas Reynolds was waiting, setting the stage for a confrontation decades in the making. The Queen of Spades stared up from the map, a silent harbinger of the deadly game that had only just begun. Dawn painted the Nevada desert in hues of amber and gold, the rising sun casting long shadows across the barren landscape. Sarah Whitman stood outside the compromised base camp, her face a mask of professional detachment despite the turmoil within. Beside her, David Young watched the horizon with the vigilance of a man who had aged years in a single night. They had buried Marcus Reed at first light, marking his grave with a simple arrangement of stones. No words were spoken during the improvised ceremony. In their line of work, death was an ever-present companion, acknowledged with solemn respect, rather than flowery eulogies. "The coordinates lead to an abandoned nuclear test site," Sarah said, studying the topographical map spread across the hood of their tactical vehicle. "Area 25, part of the Nevada test range, used extensively during the Cold War for underground nuclear testing." David traced the route with his finger. "Rough terrain, minimal cover for the last 5 miles. Perfect kill zone." "Exactly what Reynolds would want," Sarah nodded. "He's dictating the terms of engagement." "It's suicide to approach directly," David pointed out, "which is why we won't." Sarah circled a position on the map. "We'll come in from the North Ridge line using the old access tunnels. According to these schematics, there's a maintenance network that runs beneath the primary testing facility." David studied her face. "You've been here before." It wasn't a question, and Sarah didn't treat it as one. 1998, Joint Training Exercise with Intelligence Services. Reynolds designed the program. The implication was clear, the location was significant. Reynolds had chosen ground where both he and Sarah had history, creating a psychological edge beyond the tactical advantage. Gear up, Sarah ordered. Minimal equipment. Speed and maneuverability are our priorities. We move in 20 minutes. As David prepared, Sarah conducted a final sweep of the base camp, searching for any additional clues Reynolds might have left. In the communications room where Marcus had been killed, she examined the entry wound more carefully. Single shot, precision execution from significant distance, no signs of struggle, the hallmarks of a professional sniper. But something didn't add up. The angle of entry suggested the shot came from the northeast, a position that offered poor visibility to the interior of the building. Only someone intimately familiar with their operational patterns would know exactly when Marcus would be in that precise location. Reynolds isn't working alone, she murmured to herself. A glint of metal caught her eye from beneath the communications console. Kneeling, Sarah retrieved a brass shell casing, examining it with growing unease. 300 Winchester Magnum, standard issue for military snipers. But this particular casing bore distinctive markings, a small cross etched into the base. Jack Morgan's signature. Sarah's blood ran cold. Each elite sniper developed personal rituals, small superstitions, or identifying marks known only to their close associates. Jack marked his rounds with a cross, a practice dating back to his early career. The implications were disturbing. Either Jack had been forced to shoot Marcus, or Sarah pocketed the casing, her mind racing through scenarios, none of them reassuring. If Jack had turned, if he was working with Reynolds, then the entire mission was compromised from the start. But why? What could possibly motivate a man with Jack's record of service to betray not only his country, but also his own protege? Outside, David had prepped their vehicle, a modified desert patrol vehicle stripped of unnecessary weight and equipped with additional fuel capacity. His expression revealed nothing of the fear he surely felt, a testament to his training. "Ready when you are, ma'am," he reported. Sarah made a split-second decision. David deserved to know what they were potentially facing. "There's been a development. Evidence suggests Colonel Morgan may be compromised." David's eyes widened slightly, the only indication of his shock. "Compromised how? Unknown at this time, but we proceed with extreme caution. Trust no one, including command, if they attempt contact." The young sniper absorbed this information with remarkable composure. "Orders, ma'am." We continue to the coordinates. "Reynolds wants something from us, or he would have eliminated us along with Marcus. Our objective remains the same: locate and neutralize the threat. But now we add a secondary objective: determine Colonel Morgan's status and the extent of his involvement." Sarah climbed into the vehicle, checking her weapon one final time. "One more thing, young. If the situation arises where you have to choose between completing the mission and survival, choose survival. I need someone to tell the truth about what happened here, regardless of the outcome." With that sobering instruction, they departed the base camp, leaving behind the first casualty of a shadow war whose parameters remained dangerously undefined. The Nevada desert concealed its dangers beneath a deceptive sameness. To the untrained eye, one stretch of sand and rock appeared identical to the next, but Sarah read the landscape like a familiar text. Every dried creek bed offered potential cover. Every ridgeline presented both opportunity and threat. They abandoned the vehicle 3 miles from their destination, concealing it beneath a camouflage tarp and continuing on foot. The sun beat down mercilessly as they navigated the rugged terrain, conserving water and movement, communicating with hand signals rather than words. By midday, they had reached the northern perimeter of Area 25. Ancient chain-link fence topped with rusted barbed wire marked the boundary of what had once been one of America's most classified locations. Signs warning of radiation hazards and unauthorized entry hung at intervals, their red lettering faded by decades of desert sun. Sarah surveyed the compound through high-powered binoculars. The main testing facility resembled an industrial complex in the last stages of decay: concrete bunkers with massive blast doors, observation towers listing at precarious angles, and a central administrative building whose windows had long since been shattered by the elements. "No movement," she reported. "But that means nothing with Reynolds." David scanned the surroundings with his spotting scope. Multiple potential sniper positions on the eastern ridge. Good fields of fire covering all obvious approach routes, which is why we're using the tunnels. Sarah indicated a small structure half buried in the hillside behind them. Maintenance access. According to the schematics, it connects to the main facility underground. They approach with practiced caution, covering each other's movement in textbook leapfrog fashion. The access door had been chained shut decades earlier, but the padlock and links had succumbed to corrosion. Sarah pulled the chain free with minimal effort, the rusted metal crumbling in her hands. The tunnel beyond was a concrete passage approximately 7 feet high and 5 feet wide. Emergency lighting, long since failed, lined the ceiling at regular intervals. Sarah activated a tactical flashlight, keeping the beam directed downward to minimize visibility from a distance. "Stay close," she instructed David. These tunnels were designed to withstand nuclear detonation, solid concrete minimum 3 feet thick. No radio communication once we're inside. David nodded, checking his sidearm before following Sarah into the darkness. The temperature dropped immediately as they left the desert heat behind the stale air carrying the musty scent of decades of abandonment. Their footsteps echoed despite their best efforts at silence, the concrete walls amplifying every sound. Sarah moved with the confidence of familiarity, navigating junctions and side passages without hesitation. "You know these tunnels well," David observed quietly. "Part of the training exercise," Sarah explained. "Scenario was a compromised nuclear facility. Hostiles had control of surface structures. Extraction team had to navigate the maintenance tunnels to reach the primary target." "Who played the hostiles?" Sarah's expression tightened. "Reynolds led the opposition force. Jack and I were on the extraction team." She paused at a junction, consulting her mental map. Reynolds knew every inch of this facility, designed traps throughout the tunnel system. Out of 20 operatives on the extraction team, only Jack and I reached the objective. "What kind of traps?" David asked, suddenly more alert. "Psychological, mostly. Reynolds was always more interested in breaking an opponent mentally than physically. He would separate team members, use recorded sounds to create false impressions of threats, manipulate lighting and temperature." A distant metallic clang echoed through the passage ahead, as if illustrating her point. Both snipers froze, weapons ready. "Could be structural settling," Sarah whispered after a full minute of silence. "These facilities have been abandoned for decades." "Or someone letting us know we're on the right track," David countered. They proceeded with heightened caution. All conversation ceased. The tunnel branched and rejoined itself in a complex network designed to maintain facility operations even during testing. Faded signs marked access points to various sections. Control room observation level. Testing chamber A. After 20 minutes of careful navigation, they reached a security checkpoint that would have once been manned by armed guards. Now it stood empty, the bulletproof glass of its windows intact, but clouded with dust. Beyond the checkpoint, the tunnel opened into a larger space, the underground portion of the main facility. Rows of computer banks, obsolete technology from another era, lined the walls. Workstations sat, abandoned paperwork still in place, as if the occupants had simply stepped away momentarily rather than departed decades ago. "Command center," Sarah identified the space. From here, they monitored and controlled the underground tests. David moved to one of the workstations, examining the yellowed papers still resting on the surface. "These are Russian," he said with surprise, holding up a sheet covered in Cyrillic text. Sarah took the document, studying it with growing concern. "This shouldn't be here. This facility was strictly American personnel. Could it be part of the training scenario you mentioned?" "No." Sarah shook her head. "The scenario was Middle Eastern terrorists, not Soviet." The implications were disturbing. Either someone had planted the documents recently, or there had been a Soviet presence at this American nuclear testing facility during the Cold War, something that would have been a major security breach. A metallic click echoed through the command center, followed by the distinctive hum of power systems activating. Overhead emergency lighting flickered to life, casting the space in a harsh fluorescent glow. "Someone's restored power," Sarah stated the obvious, immediately moving to a defensive position behind one of the computer banks. David followed suit, taking cover on the opposite side of the room to create crossfire capability. A voice crackled over the facility's ancient intercom system, the sound quality poor, but the message unmistakable. "Welcome back, Sarah. I've been expecting you." Thomas Reynolds, the ghost himself. You always did prefer dramatic entrances? Thomas, Sarah called out, keeping her position concealed. A dry chuckle resonated through the speakers. And you always did prefer the direct approach. How many men did you bring this time? Just the rookie. I'm almost disappointed. Sarah exchanged glances with David, silent communication confirming their strategy. Keep Reynolds talking while attempting to locate the source of his transmission. Where are Jack and James? Sarah demanded. Straight to business. Reynolds sounded almost approving. Your colleagues are unharmed for now. Their continued well-being depends entirely on your next actions. And what exactly do you want me to do? Simply listen, Reynolds replied. 20 minutes of your time. The truth about Operation Checkmate and what really happened in Berlin. After that, if you still want to put a bullet in my head, I won't stop you. Sarah remained silent, processing the offer. Reynolds was too experienced to expose himself without precautions. This was another part of his game, another layer of manipulation. Why should I trust anything you say? She finally responded. You killed Marcus. Did I? Reynolds countered. Are you certain about that? Or are you making assumptions based on incomplete intelligence, just as you were sent to eliminate me based on fabricated evidence? The question struck uncomfortably close to Sarah's own doubts. The shell casing with Jack's mark weighed heavily in her pocket. Central elevator shaft, Reynolds continued. Alone. 20 minutes of conversation. Then you decide who the real enemy is. The intercom clicked off, leaving Sarah and David in tense silence. It's a trap, David stated flatly. Of course it is, Sarah agreed, but it might be the only way to locate Jack and James. He'll have the elevator shaft covered. Multiple angles, probably automated weapon systems knowing his background. Sarah nodded, which is why you're not coming with me. I need you to find an alternative route to the lower levels. The schematics showed maintenance shafts running parallel to the main elevator. Find one, get below, and be ready to provide support if things go sideways. David's expression revealed his reluctance to separate. With all due respect, ma'am, standard protocol in this situation. Went out the window the moment Marcus was killed. Sarah cut him off. Reynolds wants me. He's expecting me to follow protocol to bring you as backup. The only advantage we have is doing the unexpected. After a moment of internal struggle, David nodded. How will I know if you need assistance? If you hear gunfire, assume I need all the assistance you can provide, Sarah replied grimly. Otherwise, focus on locating Jack and James. Reynolds will keep them close but secure. They synchronized watches and established basic contingency plans before separating. David disappeared into a side passage that service records indicated would lead to maintenance access, while Sarah approached the central elevator with deliberate caution. The elevator doors stood partially open, the car itself visible a few feet below the level of the floor. Sarah examined the gap without touching anything, checking for tripwires or pressure plates, the standard components of improvised traps. Finding nothing obvious, she pried the doors further apart and dropped silently into the elevator car. Inside, the control panel glowed with restored power. A single button illuminated sub-level 3. Sarah pressed it without hesitation, understanding that each move deeper into the facility was a move deeper into Reynolds' carefully orchestrated scenario. The elevator descended with surprising smoothness. Given its age, the floors passing in silent succession. When the doors opened on sub-level 3, Sarah found herself facing a long corridor illuminated by the same emergency lighting as above. At the far end, a figure sat at a metal table, hands folded patiently. Thomas Reynolds. Even from a distance, he cut an imposing figure. Tall, lean, with silver hair cropped military short, he projected the calm confidence of a man accustomed to controlling any situation. Unlike the muscular bulk of many special operations personnel, Reynolds had always relied on precision rather than power, his frame wiry and efficient. Sarah approached with measured steps, her rifle held ready, but not aimed directly at Reynolds. As she drew closer, she noted the details, the faint scar running along his left jawline, the result of a mission in Lebanon decades earlier. The perfect stillness with which he held himself, a sniper's discipline, and most notably the complete lack of visible weapons. No greeting for an old friend. Reynolds spoke first, his voice carrying the slight rasp of a man who had spent too many years giving orders in the field. We were never friends, Thomas, Sarah replied, stopping 10 feet from the table. Colleagues at best. Reynolds smiled, the expression not reaching his eyes. Jack spoke highly of you, you know. Said you were the best he'd ever trained. High praise from a man not known for compliments. Where is he? Easy, safe, as promised. Reynolds gestured to the chair opposite him. Please sit. 20 minutes is agreed. Sarah remained standing. Start talking. The clock is ticking. Reynolds nodded, seemingly unsurprised by her caution. Operation Checkmate. Berlin, 1989. The official record states that a Soviet mole was identified within our Berlin station, but escaped before capture. 5 American agents behind the Iron Curtain were subsequently eliminated. I know the history, Sarah said tersely. You know the fiction, Reynolds corrected. The actual operation was something quite different. There was no Soviet mole in Berlin station. The compromised intelligence came from much higher up the chain, from an organization within our own government called the Committee. Sarah maintained her neutral expression despite her interest. The term matched exactly what Jack had alluded to in their last private conversation. The committee was established in the early Cold War, Reynolds continued. Senior intelligence officials, military leaders, certain political appointees. Their mandate was to ensure American superiority by any means necessary, including operations that would never receive official sanction. Every agency has its Black Operations Division, Sarah pointed out. That's hardly a revelation. The difference, Reynolds leaned forward slightly, is that the committee operated without oversight. Not from Congress, not from the president. They answered only to themselves, justifying every action as necessary for national security. An Operation Checkmate was a committee operation designed to maintain the balance of power during the final years of the Cold War. Reynolds' voice took on a harder edge. The Berlin Wall was coming down. Soviet influence was waning. The committee feared the consequences of an uncontrolled collapse of the Soviet system. So they helped the Soviets. In a manner of speaking, Reynolds nodded. They selectively provided intelligence to Soviet handlers, enough to maintain the Soviet intelligence apparatus while preventing major strategic advantages, a controlled degradation rather than a chaotic collapse. Sarah's mind raced, connecting dots from 100 fragmentary conversations with Jack over the years. His oblique references to decisions made at levels above our pay grade, his occasional bitter remarks about civilian oversight, and the 5 agents who died, she pressed. Reynolds' expression darkened. Sacrifices deemed acceptable by the committee. Assets whose elimination would convince the Soviets the intelligence was legitimate while not compromising major operations. You expect me to believe Jack Morgan was part of this, a man who dedicated his life to American security? Jack wasn't just part of it. Reynolds met her gaze steadily. He was one of its most effective operators. The perfect soldier who followed orders without question, who believed so deeply in the system that he would do anything to preserve it, including betraying the very principles it was founded upon. Sarah maintained her composure with professional discipline, but inside doubt gnawed at her certainty. The shell casing in her pocket seemed to grow heavier. You're claiming Jack Morgan, decorated combat veteran, the man who trained generations of America's elite warriors, was a traitor. I'm saying Jack Morgan, like many patriots, believed the end justified the means. Reynolds reached slowly into his jacket, telegraphing his movements to avoid alarming Sarah. He withdrew a small digital storage device and placed it on the table. Everything I've told you is documented here. Operational orders, communication transcripts, the committee's membership past and present, including their current operations. Sarah made no move to take the device. And you expect me to trust this information from a man alleged to have sold state secrets to terrorists? Reynolds smiled sadly. Did you ever ask yourself why a man with my background, my resources, would be caught so easily on satellite surveillance? Why evidence of my betrayal would surface so conveniently just as the committee faced its first serious internal investigation in decades? The question struck uncomfortably close to Sarah's earlier doubts about the intelligence that had led them to Nevada. I was never a traitor, Sarah, Reynolds continued quietly. I was a threat to the committee because I kept records. Insurance, if you will, against the day when their operations crossed from morally questionable to actively dangerous. That day has come. What changed, Sarah asked despite herself. The nature of the enemy. Reynolds' voice took on a passionate intensity. During the Cold War, the conflict was between nation-states governed by mutually understood rules and limitations. Today's threats are decentralized, ideological. willing to employ methods that would have been unthinkable even to the KGB. He leaned forward. The committee has adapted accordingly. They're employing the same playbook, selectively empowering certain terrorist groups to contain others, creating controlled conflicts to prevent larger ones. But the variables have multiplied beyond their ability to predict outcomes. They're losing control of their own creation. A distant metallic clang interrupted their conversation, echoing through the facility's ventilation system. Both veteran operatives tensed attention, momentarily diverted to potential threats. "Your young colleague, no doubt," Reynolds observed after a moment of silence, "attempting to outflank me as you keep me distracted. A sound strategy, if somewhat predictable." "You still haven't explained Marcus." Sarah redirected the conversation, neither confirming nor denying Reynolds' assessment. A flash of genuine regret crossed the older man's features. "A tragic necessity. The committee has resources monitoring all official communications. Your mission needed to appear compromised. Your team scattered to create the opportunity for this conversation. You're saying you didn't kill him." "I arranged the circumstances," Reynolds admitted. "The actual trigger pull belonged to someone else." The shell casing with Jack's mark seemed to burn in Sarah's pocket. "Jack," she said flatly. Reynolds neither confirmed nor denied, simply watching her with the calculated assessment of a chess master tracking an opponent's realization of an inevitable checkmate. "Why involve me at all?" Sarah demanded, anger seeping into her professional demeanor. "If you have the evidence, take it public. Go to the press, to Congress. The committee has people in every major news organization, influential positions in congressional oversight. Any conventional approach would be contained, discredited, eliminated." Reynolds tapped the storage device. "This information needs to reach specific individuals who can act on it independently, people with both the authority and integrity to dismantle the committee permanently." "And you needed me to deliver it," Sarah concluded. "I needed someone the committee wouldn't immediately suspect," Reynolds corrected. "Someone with the skills to complete the mission if I don't survive. Someone Jack trained but never fully controlled." The implications hung heavy between them. Reynolds was offering Sarah a choice: continue her mission to eliminate him, or accept his narrative and become the carrier of information that could bring down some of the most powerful figures in American intelligence. Before she could respond, the facility's emergency lighting flickered, plunging them momentarily into darkness before stabilizing. Reynolds glanced upward, a frown crossing his features. "It appears we have company," he said quietly. "Earlier than expected." Sarah maintained her tactical position. "Explain." "The committee monitors all official operations. When your team went dark after Marcus's death, they would have dispatched a cleanup crew. Standard protocol for compromised black operations." "A hit team," Sarah translated. "Precisely. To eliminate all witnesses and evidence, including you." Reynolds stood slowly, hands remaining visible. "Our 20 minutes are up, Sarah. Decision time. Are you still here to kill me, or are we now on the same side?" Sarah's training and instincts warred with the growing evidence supporting Reynolds' claims. The shell casing, the inconsistencies in their intelligence briefing, Jack's cryptic warnings and sudden disappearance. "Where are Jack and James?" she demanded, neither accepting nor rejecting his offer of alliance. "2 levels down, secure but unharmed." Reynolds reached for the data device. "Take this. Regardless of your decision about me, the information needs to survive." Sarah accepted the device with her left hand, her right maintaining grip on her weapon. "I'm not convinced either way, but right now we have a more immediate threat." Reynolds nodded, professional respect evident in his expression. "The maintenance shaft at the end of this corridor leads to a secondary command center. Your colleague should have found his way there by now. We can regroup, assess the tactical situation." "After you," Sarah gestured with her weapon, unwilling to turn her back on Reynolds, despite their temporary alignment against a common threat. As they moved down the corridor, the distant sound of boots on metal grating confirmed Reynolds' warning. The cleanup team had arrived, and based on the multiple footfalls, they had come in force. "How many?" Sarah asked tersely. "Standard committee elimination, the team is 6 operators, former special forces, usually with intelligence backgrounds. Deadly and deniable." They reached the maintenance shaft, a narrow vertical passage with metal rungs embedded in the concrete wall. Reynolds paused, looking back at Sarah. "I'll go first," he offered. "Show of good faith." Sarah nodded, maintaining her weapon at the ready position as Reynolds began his descent. The shaft was narrow enough that she could easily shoot him if necessary, a fact they both understood without discussion. The tactical situation had evolved beyond the parameters of her original mission. Sarah now faced multiple adversaries with uncertain loyalties. Jack possibly compromised, Reynolds claiming to be an ally rather than a target, an unknown hit team approaching with lethal intent. Her training provided no clear protocol for such circumstances. This was the shadowy realm of intelligence operations where official directives ended and personal judgment began, the gray area where careers and lives could end with a single misstep. As she followed Reynolds down the shaft, Sarah made a temporary decision. Survive first, determine loyalties later. The hit team represented an immediate threat. Reynolds offered information and a potential path to her missing teammates. The maintenance shaft terminated in a small access room filled with electrical panels and ventilation controls. A single door led to what Reynolds had described as a secondary command center. He approached it cautiously, signaling for Sarah to cover the shaft entrance against pursuit. "Your colleague should be on the other side," Reynolds whispered, hand on the door handle. "He may react hostilely to my presence." "I'll handle David," Sarah assured him. "Just move slowly and keep your hands visible." Reynolds nodded and opened the door carefully. The space beyond was indeed a smaller version of the main command center, with monitoring stations arranged in a semicircle facing a central display wall. The room appeared empty at first glance. "David," Sarah called softly, entering behind Reynolds. "Status report." A shuffle of movement from behind a computer console revealed David Young, his sniper rifle trained unwaveringly at Reynolds' chest. "On target, ma'am," David replied, his voice professional despite the tension evident in his posture. "Awaiting your order." Reynolds remained perfectly still, hands raised slightly to demonstrate his non-threatening status. "Your protege has excellent positioning instincts," he commented to Sarah. "Covered both entrances with clean firing lines." "Stand down, David," Sarah instructed. "Temporary ceasefire. We have a new complication." David maintained his aim. "Ma'am, with respect, this man is our primary target." "Situation has evolved," Sarah explained. "Committee hit team inbound. At least 6 operators. Reynolds claims Jack and James are being held 2 levels below us." "And you believe him?" Skepticism saturated David's tone. "I'm reserving judgment," Sarah replied honestly. "But right now he's our best source of intel on the facility and the incoming threat." After a moment of visible internal struggle, David lowered his weapon marginally. "I found something you should see, ma'am." He indicated a surveillance monitor on one of the still functioning workstations. The screen displayed a grainy but recognizable feed of a storage room elsewhere in the facility. 2 figures were visible, Jack Morgan and James Lawson, both restrained to metal chairs, apparently unharmed, but clearly captive. "Found the feed while searching for access routes," David explained. "Can't determine the exact location, but it's definitely within the facility." Sarah studied the image carefully, noting details beyond the obvious. Jack sat rigidly upright, his posture military precise, despite his restraints. James appeared more disheveled, head hanging forward slightly, as if exhausted or injured. "This proves nothing," David pointed out. "They could have been Reynolds' prisoners all along." "Or they could be exactly what I described," Reynolds countered calmly. "Personnel secured for their own protection until I could determine whose side you're on, Sarah." The facility's emergency lighting flickered again, more pronounced this time. A distant explosion resonated through the concrete structure, vibrating the floor beneath their feet. "Hit teams making entry," Reynolds assessed. "Breaching charges on the main access points. Standard committee protocol, secure all exits, then sweep inward level by level." Sarah made a rapid tactical decision. "David, hold this position. Monitor the surveillance feeds, track the hit team's movement. Reynolds and I will attempt to reach Jack and James." "Splitting up is exactly what they want," David protested. "Which is why you'll maintain communication with these." Sarah handed him 2 short-range radio units taken from her tactical vest. "Channel 3 encrypted. Check in every 5 minutes. If you miss 2 consecutive checks, we come back for you." David accepted the radios reluctantly. "And if you miss a check, then complete the mission without us," Sarah replied grimly. "Get the data device I'm carrying to this address." She quickly wrote down contact information for a trusted former commander now working in the Pentagon's Inspector General office. Reynolds watched this exchange with approval. Your instructor taught you well, he commented as they prepared to leave. Contingency planning was always Jack's specialty. Sarah's expression hardened at the mention of her mentor. Let's be clear, Reynolds. I haven't accepted your narrative. If I find evidence you've manipulated this situation that you're responsible for Marcus's death, or harm to Jack and James, our temporary alliance ends immediately. Fair enough, Reynolds nodded. Judge me by my actions, not my words. They exited through a secondary maintenance passage, leaving David in the command center, with a clear defensive position and communication protocols established. As they navigated the narrow utility corridors of the facility another explosion echoed through the structure closer this time. They're moving fast, Reynolds observed. Professional work. Tell me about this hit team, Sarah requested, pragmatism overriding her lingering suspicions. Tactics, equipment, command structure. 6 operators, as I mentioned. Mix of military backgrounds, but all with subsequent intelligence community experience. Usually deployed in 3 two-man teams. 1 security element to hold extraction points. 1 assault element for primary targets. 1 cleanup team for evidence. Weapons, suppressed MP5s or similar. Sidearms with subsonic ammunition. Flashbangs rather than fragmentation grenades to minimize structural damage. These facilities were built to contain nuclear tests, so they prefer not to risk collapse. They reached a junction where the passage split into 3 separate roads. Reynolds pointed to the rightmost option. This leads to a maintenance elevator shaft. Manual operation in case of power failure. We can use it to reach the detention level. Sarah gestured for him to proceed, maintaining tactical spacing as they continued. The passage narrowed further, forcing them to move in single file through sections barely wide enough for their shoulders. The concrete walls, designed to withstand nuclear detonation, created a claustrophobic environment that amplified every sound. Jack trusted you, Reynolds spoke quietly as they advanced. Despite his involvement with the committee, his affection for you was genuine. He saw in you the ideals he had compromised in himself. Save the psychological analysis, Sarah replied coldly. Focus on the mission. Reynolds continued undeterred. You need to understand his motivations to make sense of his actions. Jack believes absolutely in American exceptionalism, in our country's unique role in maintaining global stability. He accepted the committee's methods because he saw them as necessary sacrifices for a greater good. Despite her attempt at professional detachment, Sarah found herself drawn into the conversation. And you didn't. I believed for many years, Reynolds admitted. Berlin was my breaking point. Watching good men die not for national security, but for political convenience, for the preservation of a status quo that primarily benefited those already in power. They reached the elevator shaft, a narrow vertical tunnel with metal rungs similar to the previous maintenance passage, but extending much deeper into the facility's substructure. Reynolds paused, listening intently before beginning his descent. The committee has existed across 12 presidential administrations, he continued as they climbed downward, outlasting any elected official, operating beyond constitutional constraints, accountable to no one. Their actions were justified during the existential threat of the Cold War, but that threat ended 30 years ago. Their power didn't. If that's true, Sarah countered, why hasn't anyone exposed them before now? Many have tried. Journalists who suddenly lost sources and credibility. Congressional investigators reassigned to irrelevant committees. Military whistleblowers discredited with psychological evaluations or criminal charges. Reynolds' voice echoed slightly in the confined space. The committee protects itself with ruthless efficiency. They reached a landing where the shaft opened onto another level of the facility. Reynolds held up a closed fist, the universal military signal to halt, then pointed to his ear. Sarah listened, detecting the faint sound of movement somewhere ahead. Both operators drew their sidearms, simultaneously operating on the identical training that formed the foundation of American special operations across generations. Reynolds indicated he would take point, with Sarah covering their 6. She nodded agreement, not out of trust, but tactical necessity. Reynolds knew the facility layout better than she did. They advanced along a corridor lined with small offices, most with their doors standing open, contents long since removed during the facility's decommissioning. The sound of movement grew more distinct, the shuffle of feet, the occasional metallic click of equipment. Reynolds gestured toward a door at the end of the corridor, then held up 2 fingers indicating a pair of hostiles. Sarah acknowledged with a nod, adjusting her grip on her weapon. They would need to take both targets simultaneously to prevent alarm. As they crept forward, Sarah's radio vibrated silently against her hip, David's scheduled check-in. She tapped the acknowledgement pattern without breaking stride, maintaining operational security. Reynolds reached the door first, positioning himself to the left of the frame, while Sarah took the right. Through the narrow gap, they could see into what appeared to be a security station. Two men in tactical gear stood with their backs to the door, examining a facility schematic spread across a desk. A series of silent hand signals between Sarah and Reynolds established their plan. On his three count, they would enter, simultaneously neutralizing the targets with maximum efficiency. Reynolds raised three fingers, then two, then one. They burst through the door in perfect coordination, weapons trained on the two figures. Hands! Show me your hands, Sarah commanded, her voice carrying the unquestionable authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed. The two men froze, then slowly raised their hands without turning. Their tactical gear bore no insignia, no identifying features beyond standard military-grade equipment. Professional ghosts, just as Reynolds had described. On your knees, fingers interlaced behind your head, Reynolds instructed, moving to secure their weapons, while Sarah maintained cover. As the men complied, Sarah studied their appearance. Both middle-aged with the hardened physiques and watchful eyes of career operators. One bore a distinctive scar across the back of his right hand, a detail she filed away mentally. Committee cleanup team, Reynolds questioned directly. Neither man responded, their expressions revealing nothing. Where are the other four? Sarah demanded. Still silence. These were professionals trained to reveal nothing under interrogation. Reynolds checked their equipment, removing communications devices and additional weapons with practiced efficiency. No standard military IDs, no identifying patches or insignia, exactly as I described. Sarah maintained her aim as Reynolds secured the captives with their own restraints. 2 down, 4 to go, she assessed, but they'll miss their check-in soon. We need to move quickly. The detention area is through there, Reynolds indicated a heavy security door on the far side of the room. Requires keycard access. Sarah searched the captured operatives, locating an access card on the older of the two men. Problem solved. As they prepared to continue, Sarah's radio vibrated again with David's next scheduled check-in. She tapped the acknowledgement pattern, then added an additional sequence, 2 targets neutralized, proceeding to objective. Reynolds watched this exchange with professional appreciation. You've established good protocols with your young colleague. He has potential. Save the evaluation for after we survive, Sarah replied, approaching the security door with weapon ready. The keycard functioned as expected, the heavy door releasing with a pneumatic hiss. Beyond lay a corridor lined with holding cells, their steel doors standing open, empty except for the last one on the right. Through its observation window, 2 figures were visible, exactly as shown on the surveillance feed, Jack Morgan and James Lawson restrained to metal chairs. Sarah approached cautiously, years of special operations experience, warning her that the situation seemed too convenient, too aligned with Reynolds' narrative. She paused at the cell door, studying the scene through the reinforced glass window before entering. Jack sat upright, his expression impassive despite the restraints securing him to the chair. James appeared semi-conscious, his head lolling forward, slightly evidence of possible drugging or mild concussion. Neither showed signs of serious physical trauma. Cover me, Sarah instructed Reynolds, who positioned himself to monitor the corridor while she entered the cell. Jack's eyes tracked her movement, recognition, and something else, something unreadable flickering across his weathered features. Sarah, he acknowledged, his voice steady, you assume Reynolds has been filling your head with his conspiracy theories. The directness of the statement caught Sarah momentarily off guard. He's provided certain information, she replied neutrally. I'm still evaluating its credibility. A wry smile touched Jack's lips. Always the professional. That's why you were my best student. Sarah moved to check James, who stirred slightly at her touch, but remained only partially coherent. He needs medical attention, she assessed. Minor sedative, Jack explained. Standard procedure for uncooperative detainees. He'll recover fully within an hour. The casual way Jack described drugging a fellow American operative sent a chill through Sarah. It aligned too closely with Reynolds' claims about the committee's methods. Reynolds says you're part of something called the committee, Sarah stated directly, watching Jack's reaction closely. Says you've been operating outside official channels since the Cold War. Jack's expression remained unchanged. Thomas always did have an active imagination. It served him well in field operations, less so in retirement. He's been chasing shadows for years, convinced there's some grand conspiracy when the reality is much simpler, which is that sometimes maintaining American security requires actions that would never receive public approval or congressional authorization. Jack met her gaze steadily. The kind of necessary evils that keep civilians safe in their beds while men like Reynolds and I carry the moral burden. It was the closest thing to a confirmation Sarah could have expected. Not an outright admission, but a justification for precisely the type of extra-constitutional operations Reynolds had described. "You killed Marcus," Sarah said flatly, reaching into her pocket to produce the shell casing with Jack's distinctive cross marking. Jack glanced at the casing without surprise or denial. A regrettable necessity. He discovered communications that would have compromised the entire operation. Reynolds had already corrupted him with his theories. The cold calculation in Jack's voice, the utter absence of remorse for a man who had served under him, solidified something in Sarah's assessment. Whatever Jack's motivations, whatever patriotic justifications he embraced, he had crossed a line that fundamentally violated the oath they had all sworn. "I need to get you and James out of here," Sarah stated, her decision made but not revealed. "The facility is being swept by what Reynolds identifies as a committee cleanup team. 2 have been neutralized, 4 remain active." "And you believe him?" Jack asked, his tone suggesting disappointment rather than surprise. "I believe the evidence of my own eyes," Sarah replied. 2 unidentified operators with professional-grade equipment and no official identification. Exactly as he described. She began releasing Jack's restraints, maintaining situational awareness even as she worked. "Can you walk?" "Of course," Jack responded, rubbing his wrists as they came free. "But Sarah, you need to understand the bigger picture. Reynolds possesses information that could compromise dozens of ongoing operations, endanger countless American assets in the field." "We'll sort that out once we're secure," Sarah deflected, moving to release James. Jack stood, stretching muscles stiff from prolonged restraint, always focused on the immediate mission. "I taught you well." As Sarah worked on James' restraints, Jack moved toward the cell door where Reynolds maintained his watch position. The 2 men, once colleagues and friends, regarded each other with the wary calculation of professional operatives whose paths had diverged. "Thomas," Jack acknowledged. "Jack," Reynolds returned evenly. "Still doing the committee's dirty work, I see." "Still chasing imaginary conspiracies," Jack countered. "Some things never change." The facility's emergency lighting flickered again, accompanied by the distant sound of gunfire. Sarah's radio vibrated against her hip with an emergency pattern, David signaling contact with hostile forces. "We need to move," she announced, supporting the semi-conscious James as he struggled to stand. "Reynolds lead position. Jack, help me with James. We'll rendezvous with David at the secondary command center." The tense group moved into the corridor, a fragile alliance born of immediate necessity rather than trust. Sarah maintained awareness of both Jack and Reynolds, uncertain which represented the greater threat to her mission and her team's survival. As they navigated the facility's concrete passages, the distant sound of gunfire grew more pronounced. David was clearly engaged with the remaining members of the hit team, his position in the secondary command center under assault. "We need to increase pace," Reynolds urged. "Your colleague won't hold out long against superior numbers." Sarah adjusted her grip on James, who was becoming more coherent but still struggled with coordination. "Jack, take point with Reynolds. I'll manage James." As Jack moved forward, Sarah used the opportunity to whisper to James, "Stay alert. Oh, trust no one, including Jack. Not if you understand." James gave a subtle nod, his eyes clearer now as the sedative's effects diminished. The group reached the maintenance elevator shaft, their planned route back to the secondary command center. Reynolds began the ascent, first followed by Jack, with Sarah and James bringing up the rear. The confined space made them vulnerable, a tactical reality that heightened Sarah's vigilance. Halfway up the shaft, Reynolds paused, listening intently. "Movement above," he whispered down. "At least 2 operators approaching the shaft access point." "Options," Sarah called up quietly. "Side passage 20 feet up," Reynolds replied. "Maintenance tunnel that runs parallel to the main corridor. Narrower, but it bypasses the likely ambush point." They adjusted their route accordingly, exiting the shaft into a cramped utility tunnel, barely wide enough for single-file movement. Reynolds led with Jack close behind while Sarah supported James at the rear. The sound of gunfire had ceased, a silence more concerning than combat noise. Your colleague has either neutralized his opposition or been neutralized himself. Reynolds assessed, voicing Sarah's own concern. Sarah attempted radio contact with David, receiving no response. We continue to the rendezvous point, she decided. Assess the situation there. As they neared the secondary command center, Reynolds held up a closed fist, signaling the group to halt. Ahead, voices could be heard, professional operators discussing tactical movements and search patterns. Committee team has secured the command center, Reynolds whispered. Your colleague is either dead or captured. Sarah processed this information with the emotional detachment of a veteran operative. Personal feelings would be addressed later if they survived. Alternative exfiltration route. Maintenance exit on the north side of the facility, Reynolds suggested, less likely to be covered if they're focusing on the main access points. Before they could adjust their plan, Jack spoke up. We need to eliminate Reynolds now, he stated quietly but firmly. He can't be allowed to leave with the information he possesses. Sarah's weapon shifted slightly, not aimed directly at either man, but positioned to cover both if necessary. We focus on exfiltration first. All other objectives are secondary. You don't understand what's at stake, Jack insisted, his voice taking on an intensity Sarah had rarely witnessed. The information Reynolds carries could collapse entire intelligence networks, compromise operations decades in the making, or expose illegal activities conducted without oversight or accountability, Reynolds countered. Your choice, Sarah, the comfortable lie or the uncomfortable truth. In that moment, surrounded by concrete walls far beneath the Nevada desert, Sarah Whitman faced the most difficult decision of her professional life. The mentor who had shaped her career versus the man whose narrative increasingly aligned with the evidence before her. The distant sound of boots on metal grating gave urgency to her decision. The remaining members of the HIT team were methodically searching the facility, drawing closer to their position with each passing minute. Sarah made her choice, aligning not with either man, but with the principles that had guided her through 20 years of service. We're leaving, together. Her tone made clear this wasn't a suggestion, but a command. Sort out your philosophical differences after we survive. As they continued toward the northern exit, the complex game of shadows, decades in the making, approached its inevitable conclusion beneath the Nevada desert. Each participant calculating moves and counter-moves, loyalties, tested truths revealed, and the foundations of Sarah's professional reality forever altered by the revelations of a single mission gone sideways. The Queen of Spades left behind at their base camp had been more prophetic than Sarah could have imagined. Death delivered from afar, yes, but also the death of certainty, of unquestioning loyalty, of the clear distinction between ally and enemy that had defined her military career. In the shadowy world between official directives and hidden agendas, Sarah advanced with the only certainty left to her, the mission to protect her team and uncover the truth regardless of how uncomfortable that truth might prove to be. The northern maintenance exit of Area 25 emerged into a landscape bathed in the harsh glow of the late afternoon sun. Sarah Whitman shielded her eyes momentarily, assessing the terrain with the practiced scrutiny of a veteran operator. Behind her, James Lawson had regained enough coordination to move independently, though his movements remained sluggish. Jack Morgan and Thomas Reynolds exited last, their decades-long rivalry temporarily suspended by the immediate threat of the committee cleanup team. 2 miles northwest, Reynolds indicated a distant ridgeline. There's an old service road that connects to the highway, less likely to be monitored than the main access routes. Sarah nodded, her tactical mind already mapping their movement. James' status. Functional, he replied tersely, checking his sidearm. Effects wearing off. Still not 100%. Reynolds takes point, Sarah decided. James and I center. Jack, you cover our 6. The arrangement was strategic, keeping both Jack and Reynolds where she could monitor them while maintaining operational effectiveness. Neither man objected, recognizing the tactical logic despite the underlying tension. As they began their movement across the open desert, Sarah activated her radio one final time. David, this is Overwatch. If you can hear this rally, point Alpha. Acknowledge. Silence answered her call. Sarah maintained her professional composure, but the absence of response weighed heavily. David Young was her responsibility, a promising operator whose first real mission had turned into a nightmare of conflicting loyalties and hidden agendas. Your colleague is resourceful, Reynolds offered as they navigated the rocky terrain. If anyone could evade capture, it would be someone you trained. Sarah acknowledged the assessment with a slight nod, unwilling to display vulnerability before either Reynolds or Jack. Personal feelings, grief, uncertainty, all were luxuries to be addressed after mission completion, if at all. The group moved in tactical silence for nearly a half-mile, using natural cover, where available maintaining visual contact without unnecessary clustering. The desert landscape offered minimal concealment, making them potential targets for any observer with decent optics. Aircraft, James alerted quietly, indicating a distant speck approaching from the east. Down, Sarah commanded. The group immediately sought cover behind rock formations, pressing their bodies against the earth to minimize visible silhouettes. The helicopter, a civilian model Bell 407 with no visible markings, passed overhead at moderate altitude. Its flight path suggested a deliberate search pattern rather than transit to a specific destination. Committee resources, Reynolds confirmed once the aircraft had passed. They maintain a network of private contractors with aviation assets, plausible deniability if questioned by official channels. They're expanding the search perimeter, Jack added, his tone professionally detached, despite his alleged connection to the organization hunting them. Standard protocol for high-value targets who've gone off-grid. Sarah studied the older man carefully. And what exactly is the protocol for targets like us Jack capture or kill? Jack met her gaze without flinching. For Reynolds, kill on sight. For you and the others, capture for interrogation, then termination once all useful information has been extracted. The cold calculation in his voice sent a chill through Sarah that had nothing to do with the desert temperature. This was a side of her mentor she had glimpsed only in the most extreme combat situations, the absolute ruthlessness that made him legendary in special operations circles. And where do you stand in this protocol, Jack? She pressed. A ghost of a smile touched his weathered features. I'm meant to deliver you all to the extraction point, then file the appropriate reports detailing how Reynolds killed the team before being eliminated himself. Efficient, Reynolds remarked sardonically. The committee always did appreciate a clean narrative. They resumed their movement toward the ridgeline, more cautious now with the knowledge that aerial surveillance was active. The sun had begun its descent toward the western horizon, casting longer shadows that provided minimal additional cover. Sarah, James spoke quietly as they navigated a particularly exposed stretch. I heard things while captive, fragments of conversation between guards, something about a doomsday protocol. Sarah glanced at Reynolds, who nodded grimly. The committee's ultimate insurance policy, he explained. In the event of exposure, they activate sleeper assets throughout the intelligence community. Critical information disappears from secure servers. Key witnesses suffer convenient accidents. Evidence becomes compromised or inadmissible. How wide is their reach? Sarah asked. Pentagon, State Department, FBI, NSA, major media organizations, Reynolds listed. Not everyone in these institutions, of course, just strategically placed individuals with access and influence. If true, exposing them could damage national security, Jack interjected. The disruption to ongoing operations alone would be catastrophic. Reynolds turned, his expression hardening. That's always been the argument, hasn't it, Jack? That the damage from exposure outweighs the damage from allowing them to continue operating beyond any constitutional authority. Because it's true, Jack shot back. The committee has prevented 3 major terrorist attacks in the past decade alone. Attacks that would have occurred if they had been forced to operate within the constraints of congressional oversight and public accountability. At what cost? Reynolds challenged. How many innocent lives sacrificed as collateral damage? How many foreign governments destabilized? How many proxy conflicts initiated that served American strategic interests while causing regional humanitarian disasters? Sarah interrupted the escalating confrontation. Enough, both of you. Philosophical debates can wait until we're not being hunted across open terrain. Both men fell silent, decades of military discipline overriding their personal animosity. The group continued toward the ridgeline, each member processing the implications of what had been revealed. For Sarah, the revelations created a professional crisis unlike any she had faced in combat. Her entire career had been built on absolute loyalty to the chain of command, on faith that the mission she executed, however morally complex, served the greater good of national security. If Reynolds was right, if the committee existed as he described, then that foundation was fundamentally compromised. As they neared the ridgeline, Reynolds signaled for the group to halt, dropping into a prone position behind a large boulder. The others followed suit, adapting to his lead without question, despite the uncertain loyalties. Movement at the service road, Reynolds reported, peering through a compact spotting scope. 2 vehicles, military-grade SUVs unmarked. 4 personnel, visible tactical gear, no identifiable insignia. Sarah took the scope, confirming his assessment. Committee assets? Almost certainly, Reynolds nodded. They have anticipated our exfiltration route. Options, James asked, checking his limited ammunition. Sarah considered their tactical situation with ruthless objectivity. 4 operators against 4 committee assets would typically be manageable odds for a team of their caliber, but James remained partially compromised from the sedative, and the loyalties within their own group were uncertain at best. We need those vehicles, she decided. Direct approach under cover of dusk. Reynolds and I will circle north to flank their position. Jack and James hold here as overwatch. Jack raised an eyebrow. Splitting the team seems unnecessarily risky, as does allowing either you or Reynolds to operate without direct supervision, Sarah countered bluntly. This arrangement keeps both of you partially contained while maximizing our tactical advantage. Neither man could argue with her logic. As the senior operational commander present, her authority remained intact despite the fracturing trust. We move in 15 minutes, Sarah instructed. Last light provides optimal conditions for the approach. Radio silence except for emergency communication. As Reynolds prepared for the flanking maneuver, Sarah took Jack aside briefly. If this goes sideways, she said quietly, if Reynolds is manipulating the situation, you take the shot. No hesitation. Jack nodded, the understanding between them transcending the current uncertainty. Whatever his allegiances might be, Jack Morgan remained one of the finest snipers in American military history, capable of making a kill shot under any conditions. And if I'm the one who can't be trusted, he asked, a hint of his old mentorship showing through the hardened exterior. Then James has his orders, Sarah replied evenly. Jack accepted this with a professional nod, perhaps even a flicker of pride at her thoroughness. You've become the operative I always knew you could be, he said. Regardless of how this plays out, remember that. Sarah allowed no emotion to show on her face as she rejoined Reynolds for their flanking movement. Personal feelings, the complex mixture of loyalty, betrayal, and uncertainty, remain locked behind the disciplined facade of a special operations commander. Reynolds led their approach with the practiced stealth of a lifetime in covert operations. Despite his age, he moved across the rocky terrain with fluid efficiency, selecting paths that minimized their visibility against the darkening landscape. Jack trained you well, he observed during a brief pause to assess their progress. The way you've handled this situation, maintaining operational effectiveness despite compromised command structure. Not many could manage that. Save the evaluation for after we survive, Sarah replied, unconsciously echoing her earlier response to a similar comment. Reynolds smiled slightly. Some phrases become habit in our line of work, professional tics that reveal more than we intend. They continued in silence, circling north of the committee team's position, using the growing shadows to conceal their movement. As they reached their flanking position, Sarah studied the 4 operators through her scope. The men moved with the coordinated precision of a team that had worked together extensively. 2 maintained watch on the surrounding terrain, while the others examined something spread across the hood of one vehicle, possibly a topographical map. Standard committee tactical team, Reynolds confirmed in a whisper. Former Special Forces extensively retrained for deniable operations. Deadly disciplined, but ultimately predictable in their protocols. Approach, Sarah questioned, deferring to his experience with these specific adversaries. They expected direct confrontation, force against force, Reynolds assessed. Their protocols emphasize overwhelming tactical advantage. They won't anticipate psychological warfare. Explain, Sarah prompted. Create the illusion of a larger opposing force. Multiple points of contact, unpredictable patterns. Make them believe they're surrounded and outmanned. Sarah considered this approach, weighing it against conventional tactical doctrine. Under normal circumstances, she would favor direct action with clear objectives, but their current situation was far from normal. We'll need a diversion, she decided, something to draw their attention while simultaneously suggesting multiple hostiles. Reynolds reached into his tactical vest, producing a small package wrapped in weatherproof material. Thermite charges, small but impressively loud, set with timed detonators. Sarah raised an eyebrow. You came prepared. I've been evading committee assets for years. Reynolds shrugged. You develop habits. They formulated a rapid plan, setting the charges at strategic points around the committee team's position. The detonations would create the impression of an organized attack from multiple directions, forcing the operators to divide their attention and potentially their forces. As darkness settled fully over the desert landscape, Sarah signaled Jack and James via their tactical radio, a brief coded sequence indicating imminent action. The acknowledgement came immediately, confirming they were in position and ready. Execute in 3, 2, 1, Sarah whispered. The first thermite charge detonated with a blinding flash and concussive report that echoed across the ridgeline. The committee team reacted with professional speed, taking defensive positions behind their vehicles, weapons oriented toward the explosion's origin. Before they could fully assess the situation, the second charge detonated from the opposite direction, creating precisely the disorienting effect Reynolds had predicted. The four operators immediately split their coverage, two facing each apparent threat. The third and fourth charges detonated in rapid succession from different positions, completing the illusion of a coordinated attack by a larger force. As the committee team attempted to maintain perimeter security, their disciplined formation began to fragment individual operators, seeking better defensive positions. Sarah keyed her radio, once signaling Jack and James to initiate covering fire. The crack of precision rifle fire added to the chaos, forcing the committee operators to seek more substantial cover. Now, Sarah commanded, and she and Reynolds began their approach, using the vehicles themselves as concealment from the operators now focused on the perceived threats from multiple directions. They reached the first vehicle undetected, Sarah taking position at the rear, while Reynolds circled to the opposite side. The nearest committee operator had his back to them, attention fixed on returning fire toward Jack's position. Sarah moved with explosive speed, closing the distance and disabling the operator with a precision strike to the base of the skull. The man collapsed without a sound, unconscious before he hit the ground. Across the vehicle, Reynolds engaged a second operator with similar efficiency, years of training evident in the economy of his movements. No wasted motion, no unnecessary force, just the clinical application of expertise honed through decades of covert operations. The remaining two committee members, realizing their position had been compromised, attempted to regroup, but the crossfire from Jack and James kept them pinned behind inadequate cover. Sarah flanked their position, approaching from their blind side, while Reynolds maintained pressure from the front. Federal operators, she announced with commanding authority, weapons down, hands visible. The committee team, trained to assess tactical realities without emotional interference, recognized their untenable position. They lowered their weapons carefully, raising their hands in compliance. Face down, hands behind your heads, Sarah instructed, covering them while Reynolds secured their weapons. As the situation stabilized, Jack and James approached from their overwatch position, completing the team's reassembly. Jack surveyed the subdued committee operators with professional detachment. They'll have check-in protocols, he noted. Failure to report will trigger additional response units. Then we need to be gone before that happens, Sarah decided. Secure them, take their communications equipment and credentials. We'll use their vehicles to reach the highway. The team worked with a practiced efficiency, restraining the committee operators with their own zip ties and removing anything that might be useful for intelligence purposes. Sarah examined their identification and equipment, finding exactly what Reynolds had described. No official government credentials, no military identification, nothing that would connect them to any recognized agency. Satisfied? Reynolds asked quietly, noting her methodical inspection. Sarah pocketed several items as evidence before responding. It confirms part of your story, not all of it. Fair enough, Reynolds acknowledged. Verification should always be your standard. Jack taught you well in that regard, even if he failed in others. Jack, overhearing this exchange, approached with measured steps. We need to discuss next step, he said, his tone professionally neutral despite the circumstances. These men will be missed within the hour. The committee will deploy additional assets, likely including air support with infrared capabilities. We split up, Reynolds suggested immediately. Different vehicles, different routes. Harder to track, improved odds of at least some of us reaching safety. So you can disappear with your alleged evidence, Jack challenged. Convenient. Enough, Sarah interjected. We stay together, one vehicle maximum speed to the nearest population center. From there, we can contact trusted resources. And who exactly qualifies as trusted in your assessment? Jack asked, a hint of his former authority seeping into his tone. Sarah met his gaze directly. At this point, no one outside this team, and even that comes with significant reservations. The implied challenge hung between them momentarily before Jack nodded, accepting her command decision, if not necessarily agreeing with it. They selected the more fuel-efficient of the two SUVs, transferring necessary equipment and ensuring the subdued committee operators were secured in a manner that would prevent immediate escape but not cause long-term harm. Sarah's training and ethical foundation remained intact despite the moral ambiguities of their situation. As they prepared to depart, Reynolds approached Sarah privately. The data device I gave you, he said quietly. Keep it on your person. If we get separated, if something happens to me, that information needs to reach the right people. And who might those be? Sarah asked, her skepticism evident. There's a list of contacts in the file. People who have investigated the committee over the years, who have the authority and integrity to act on the evidence. Reynolds met her gaze steadily. Whatever you may think of me, Sarah, whatever Jack has told you over the years, judge the information on its own merits. The truth matters regardless of its source. Before she could respond, a distant sound caught their attention. The distinctive thrum of helicopter rotors approaching from the east. Air assets, Jack confirmed grimly. Sooner than expected, their surveillance must have spotted the confrontation. Move out, Sarah ordered the team, immediately responding to her command. Maximum speed to the highway, then we improvise. They piled into the SUV, Sarah taking the wheel with James beside her navigating. Jack and Reynolds sat in the back, the forced proximity of former colleagues turned adversaries, creating palpable tension. Sarah accelerated away from the ridgeline, driving without headlights despite the growing darkness. Her night vision training allowed her to navigate using only ambient starlight, minimizing their visibility to aerial pursuit. The service road was little more than a rutted dirt track, challenging even for the tactical SUV's enhanced suspension. Sarah pushed the vehicle to its limits, balancing speed against the risk of disabling damage. Behind them, the helicopter drew closer. Powerful searchlights beginning to sweep the terrain in expanding patterns. They're using infrared, Jack assessed, watching through the rear window. Standard committee search protocol. They'll have our heat signature soon. There, James indicated a narrow side passage barely visible in the darkness. Old mining access road. Cuts through that rock formation might provide temporary cover from aerial observation. Sarah made the turn without slowing the SUV, fishtailing slightly before regaining traction. The passage narrowed alarmingly, rock walls scraping the vehicle's sides as they pushed deeper into the formation. Kill the engine, Reynolds instructed as they reached a natural alcove within the rocks. Infrared will still detect residual heat, but it might buy us time to assess options. Sarah complied, bringing the vehicle to a stop and shutting down all systems. The sudden silence felt oppressive after the sustained mechanical noise of their escape. They'll have ground teams converging as well. Jack noted his professional assessment continuing despite his questionable allegiance. Standard procedure would be to establish a perimeter and work inward. If we stay here, we'll be cornered within 30 minutes. We need to split their attention, Sarah decided. Create multiple heat signatures, force them to divide resources. The second vehicle, James suggested, program it to drive autonomously, create a diversion while we move on foot to a secondary extraction point. These modern tactical vehicles have sufficient automated systems to manage basic navigation, Reynolds confirmed. We could program a route, send it in the opposite direction while we proceed on foot. Sarah nodded. James, you and Reynolds return to the primary position. Reprogram the second vehicle, set it on a course eastward. Jack and I will scout ahead for the best escape route on foot. The division of personnel maintained her established pattern of separating Jack and Reynolds while ensuring each was paired with someone of uncertain loyalty. Trust had become tactical, a resource to be managed like ammunition or communications. As James and Reynolds departed to execute their portion of the plan, Sarah led Jack deeper into the rock formation, seeking a vantage point that would provide visibility without exposure. She's good, Jack commented as they climbed a steep incline. Better than I expected given her age and limited field experience. Sarah glanced at him questioningly. Agent Whitman, Jack clarified. Her performance under these conditions. The committee trains its operators extensively, yet she's managing the situation with remarkable composure. Sarah processed this statement with growing concern. What are you talking about? Jack James has been with Special Operations for 15 years. A cold smile touched Jack's weathered features. James Lawson died in Afghanistan 3 years ago. The man accompanying Reynolds is Agent Rebecca Whitman, committee deep cover operative, assigned to monitor Reynolds after his initial departure from the organization. The revelation struck Sarah like physical blow, momentarily disrupting her professional composure. You're lying. Am I? Jack challenged. Check his tactical gear when they return. Left shoulder pocket hidden compartment, standard location for committee emergency communication devices. Or ask about Operation Silverback in Honduras. The real James Lawson was there, but this imposter will hesitate before providing details. Sarah's mind raced, reviewing every interaction with James since the mission began. Had there been inconsistencies she'd overlooked? Moments of unfamiliarity with protocols or equipment that should have been second nature to a veteran operator? Why tell me this now? She demanded. Because the situation has evolved beyond original parameters, Jack replied with disturbing calm. The committee wanted Reynolds eliminated quietly, his alleged evidence contained. That option is no longer viable. Now we need to control the narrative, determine who knows what, and limit exposure. And where do I fit in this revised plan? Sarah asked, though she already suspected the answer. Jack's expression softened slightly, perhaps with genuine regret. You were never supposed to be involved, Sarah. You were the best student I ever trained, the one operator who truly understood the balance between mission objectives and ethical constraints. Answer the question, Jack. In the revised scenario, you discovered Reynolds' betrayal, but were killed attempting to apprehend him. A tragic loss in service to your country. Jack's voice remained steady, professional. Your reputation remains intact. Your family receives full benefits and recognition. A hero's funeral at Arlington. The cold calculation behind this scenario, the impersonal balancing of assets and liabilities, revealed more about the committee's operations than any of Reynolds' explicit claims. And the real plan, Sarah pressed, maintaining outward calm despite the implications. Depends entirely on your next decisions, Jack replied. The committee prefers to recover valuable assets rather than eliminate them. Your skills, your reputation within the community, these have significant operational value. You're recruiting me, Sarah realized. After everything that's happened, you still think I would join this organization? Not immediately, Jack acknowledged. There would be a transition period. Carefully selected missions gradually introducing you to the realities of global security management beyond the constraints of public oversight. The same path you followed, Sarah observed. Jack nodded. I was like you once. Idealistic. Committed to the official chain of command. Then I saw how political considerations repeatedly compromised operational effectiveness, how elected officials without military experience countermanded tactical decisions for publicity purposes, how bureaucracy and oversight committees hindered our ability to preempt threats. So you joined an organization that operates without any accountability at all, Sarah challenged. We are accountable, Jack countered, not to politicians seeking re-election or public opinion shaped by incomplete information, but to the objective reality of national security requirements. Every action justified by results, by American lives saved. The helicopter passed overhead, searchlights sweeping the terrain beyond their rocky shelter. In the distance, vehicle engines could be heard as ground teams established the perimeter Jack had predicted. Time's running short, Jack noted calmly. When Reynolds and Agent Whitman return, decisions will need to be made. Final positions taken. Sarah studied her mentor's face, searching for some hint of the man who had shaped her career, who had taught her not just tactical skills, but ethical frameworks for their application. She found only the cold pragmatism of a man who had long ago decided that ends justified means. I trusted you, she said finally, the words carrying the weight of 2 decades of loyalty. And I never betrayed that trust, Jack replied with apparent sincerity. Everything I taught you was true. Every mission I assigned you served legitimate national security interests. The only difference was context, the larger strategic framework, invisible to those without appropriate clearance. Before Sarah could respond, movement below caught her attention. Reynolds and James, or rather the agent posing as James, were returning from their task. Decision time, Jack said quietly. Remember everything I taught you about tactical realities versus emotional responses. Sarah descended to meet the returning team members, her mind processing multiple scenarios simultaneously. If Jack was telling the truth about James, then she faced not one but two opponents with uncertain loyalty. If he was lying, creating division within the team as a psychological operation, then the betrayal cut even deeper than she had imagined. Vehicle programmed and dispatched, Reynolds reported as they regrouped. Heading east at maximum speed should draw their aerial assets away temporarily. Ground teams establishing containment perimeter, Sarah informed them. We need to move before they complete the encirclement. There's a drainage channel on the western edge of this formation that might provide cover for movement toward the highway. As the team prepared to move out, Sarah maintained heightened awareness of James, watching for any confirmation of Jack's claim. The agent moved with the practiced efficiency of a special operations veteran to gear, arranged in standard configuration. Communications protocols followed precisely. Sarah made a decision, a tactical gamble, based on incomplete information and dwindling options. James, take point, she ordered. Reynolds on your 6. Jack and I will cover the rear approach. As James moved into position, Sarah casually tapped the left shoulder pocket of his tactical vest. Comms check, she requested. Make sure your backup unit is active. The momentary hesitation was subtle, almost imperceptible, but to Sarah's trained eye it confirmed Jack's revelation. A true special operations veteran would know immediately that backup communication devices were carried in right shoulder pockets never left. All systems operational, James replied after the slight delay, perhaps realizing the error, but unable to correct without confirming suspicion. Sarah maintained her professional demeanor, giving no indication of her discovery. The tactical situation had just become exponentially more complex. Two senior operators with decades of experience, both connected to a clandestine organization operating beyond constitutional constraints, and both now aware that she knew their true allegiance. The team moved out navigating the drainage channel with practiced stealth. Water had carved a path through the rock formation over centuries, creating a natural corridor that provided both concealment and a route toward the distant highway. Ground team approaching from the east. Reynolds reported quietly monitoring their communications through a captured radio. Two vehicles, approximately 8 operators, establishing blocking positions along likely exit routes. They're using standard containment protocols, Jack assessed. Establishing a perimeter, then tightening methodically. Helicopter assets will return once they determine the eastbound vehicle is a diversion. Sarah evaluated their options with ruthless objectivity. With James revealed as a committee agent and Jack openly advocating for the organization, her effective team had been reduced to herself and Reynolds, a man she still didn't fully trust. Reynolds, she spoke quietly as they paused at a junction in the drainage channel. That evidence you mentioned, how comprehensive is it? Names, operations, financial transactions, he replied without hesitation. Everything needed to expose the committee's existence and methods to congressional oversight. And what happens then, she pressed. If this organization has the reach, you claim what prevents them from simply eliminating anyone who receives this information. Critical mass, Reynolds explained, distributed evidence across multiple oversight bodies simultaneously. Too many targets to eliminate without confirming their own existence. Sarah nodded, making her decision. When we reach the next bend, I'm going to create a diversion. You take the data and proceed to the western exit point. I'll handle Jack and our committee friend. Reynolds studied her face, perhaps searching for deception. You're choosing a side. I'm choosing accountability, Sarah corrected. Whatever the committee's original purpose, operating without oversight inevitably leads to corruption. Jack taught me that, ironically enough. As they approached the bend in the drainage channel, Sarah subtly positioned herself to maximize tactical advantage. Jack and James followed several paces behind, maintaining professional spacing despite the revealed loyalties. Now, Sarah whispered to Reynolds, immediately dropping to a defensive position and bringing her weapon to bear on Jack. Both of you, weapons down, hands where I can see them. Jack showed no surprise at this development, perhaps having anticipated it from their earlier conversation. Think carefully about your next move, Sarah, he advised calmly. The tactical situation hasn't changed. Committee assets still surround us. The only difference is your awareness of the players. The difference is accountability, Sarah replied, maintaining her aim. Drop your weapons, both of you. James, or rather Agent Whitman, hesitated longer, perhaps calculating the probability of successful resistance. After a tense moment, both operators complied, carefully placing their sidearms on the ground. Reynolds, move out, Sarah ordered without taking her eyes off the two committee agents. Get that evidence to your contacts. Sarah, Jack's voice took on the authoritative tone he had used throughout her training. You're making a mistake based on incomplete information. Reynolds is manipulating you, using your ethical framework against you. Maybe, she acknowledged, but at least his agenda includes oversight and accountability. Yours perpetuates power without restraint. Reynolds hesitated before departing. What about you? I'll handle containment here, Sarah replied. Buy you the time you need. Go. As Reynolds disappeared around the bend in the channel, Sarah maintained her position, weapon trained on the two committee operatives. You realize this changes nothing, Jack said, his tone almost conversational despite the circumstances. The committee has resources you can't imagine. Reynolds will be intercepted before he reaches any of his supposed contacts. Perhaps, Sarah conceded, but his evidence will still exist, and now others know about it. The truth has a way of emerging eventually. Truth is subjective in our line of work, Jack countered. Always has been. The official narrative serves a purpose greater than factual accuracy. It maintains public confidence, preserves operational security, justifies actions that would never survive scrutiny, Sarah added pointedly. A humorless smile touched Jack's weathered features. You're still thinking like a soldier, Sarah. Black and white, right and wrong. The real world operates in shades of gray. Always has. And that justifies murder manipulation operating beyond any constitutional authority. It justifies doing what's necessary to protect American interests, Jack stated with absolute conviction. The Constitution wasn't written with modern threats in mind. Terrorists with biological weapons, rogue states with nuclear capabilities, cyber warfare that can collapse financial systems without firing a shot. The sound of approaching vehicles interrupted their ideological confrontation, committee ground teams closing in on their position. Last chance, Sarah, Jack offered. Join us. Your skills, your reputation, both would be invaluable to the committee's operations. Continue serving your country just with the resources and freedom to actually make a difference. Sarah considered her mentor's words, not because she was tempted by the offer, but because she needed to understand the mindset that had led a man she respected to embrace such a fundamentally corrupted system. You believe you're the hero in this story, she observed quietly. That's what makes the committee so dangerous. You've convinced yourselves that operating without oversight is patriotism rather than its opposite. Jack's expression hardened. We've served longer, seen more, understand the realities of global security better than any elected official with a 4-year horizon and re-election concerns. That's not arrogance, it's experience. It's exactly the justification every authoritarian has used throughout history, Sarah countered, the claim that some special knowledge or insight justifies power without accountability. The approaching vehicles stopped nearby doors, opening and closing as committee operators deployed to their position. Time had run out for philosophical debate. What now? Agent Whitman asked, speaking for the first time since being exposed. You're surrounded, outnumbered, with limited ammunition and no extraction plan. Sarah smiled slightly. You underestimate the training your colleague provided. She nodded toward Jack. He taught me to always have contingency plans. With practiced efficiency, she triggered a remote detonator concealed in her tactical vest. The resulting explosion from the vehicle they had abandoned earlier echoed across the desert landscape, drawing immediate attention from the committee operators surrounding them. In the momentary confusion, Sarah fired 3 rapid shots, not at Jack or Agent Whitman, but at the rock formation above the drainage channel. The precisely placed rounds triggered a minor collapse, filling the channel between her position and the committee agents with rubble and dust. Impressive, Jack's voice carried through the settling dust, but ultimately futile. You've bought minutes, not freedom. Freedom was never the objective, Sarah replied, already moving backward toward her planned extraction route. Just time and accountability. She disappeared into the darkness before the committee operators could regroup, navigating the complex terrain with the skills honed through 2 decades of special operations training. Jack had taught her well, perhaps too well for the committee's purposes. As she made her way toward a secondary extraction point known only to her, Sarah reflected on the fundamental choice she had made. Not between Jack and Reynolds, both men compromised in different ways, but between systems of accountability, between power constrained by oversight and power justified by its own assessment of necessity. Her immediate future remained uncertain. The committee's resources were substantial, their reach extending throughout the institutions she had served her entire career. She would be labeled a rogue operator, perhaps even a traitor, her distinguished service record rewritten to serve the official narrative. But Reynolds' evidence would survive, distributed to those with the authority and integrity to act upon it. The truth would emerge not immediately, perhaps, but inevitably. Accountability would eventually find even those who had operated for decades beyond its reach. 3 days later, in a nondescript motel room outside Las Vegas, Sarah watched the beginning of that process unfold on a television news broadcast. "Breaking news from Washington," the anchor announced with practiced gravity. "Multiple congressional committees have announced investigations into allegations of a clandestine intelligence organization operating outside federal oversight. The allegations, supported by documents provided by an anonymous source, suggest decades of unauthorized operations conducted without knowledge of elected officials." The screen displayed images of senior intelligence officials arriving for emergency meetings at the White House, their expressions grim as they navigated swarms of reporters. Among the allegations, the anchor continued, are claims that this organization, referred to in documents as the Committee, conducted assassination operations on American soil, manipulated intelligence assessments provided to elected officials, and maintained unofficial diplomatic channels with foreign adversaries. Sarah turned away from the broadcast, focusing instead on cleaning the disassembled components of her sidearm spread across the motel room desk. The ritual, performed countless times throughout her career, provided a center of calm amid the chaos she had helped unleash. A knock at the door interrupted her concentration. 3 precise taps followed by 2 softer ones. The prearranged signal. She reassembled her weapon with practiced efficiency before approaching the door, maintaining tactical awareness despite the apparent friendly contact. David Young stood in the doorway, his appearance substantially altered from when she had last seen him. Civilian clothes, hair grown out slightly, subtle changes in posture and movement designed to avoid recognition. "You made it." Sarah observed genuine relief breaking through her professional composure. "Barely," David replied as she ushered him inside, securing the door behind him. "Committee cleanup team had me cornered in the command center. Would have been finished if not for your diversion with the vehicles." "How did you evade capture?" "Maintenance shafts," David explained. "Tight spaces they couldn't follow. Made it to an emergency exit on the south side, then cross-country to a highway truck stop. Been moving every day since, using the protocols you established." Sarah nodded approvingly. Her contingency planning had included separate extraction routes and rendezvous protocols for each team member, precautions that had seemed excessive during mission preparation but had proven essential. "Reynolds?" she asked. "Made contact with his intelligence community allies," David confirmed. "Evidence has been distributed to multiple oversight bodies. Too widespread to contain now." And Jack, a shadow crossed David's features. "No confirmed information. He disappeared during the committee's initial response to the exposure. Most senior operatives have gone dark, abandoning known identities and resources." Sarah absorbed this information without visible reaction. Jack Morgan had spent decades operating in the shadows. Disappearing completely would be well within his capabilities. "What's our next move?" David asked the question, acknowledging Sarah's continued leadership despite the fragmentation of their original mission. She considered their options with the strategic assessment skills Jack had helped her develop. The irony wasn't lost on her, using the training he had provided to potentially dismantle the organization he had served. "We maintain separation, operate independently, but with coordinated objectives," she decided. "The committee will be focused on damage control, eliminating evidence, and discrediting witnesses. Our job is to ensure the investigation proceeds despite their efforts." "Going public isn't an option," David noted. "Our identities, our operational history, everything would be compromised." "We don't need public visibility," Sarah countered. "Just strategic support for those conducting the official investigations. Intelligence on committee resources and methods, advance warning of containment operations." David nodded, understanding the approach. They would continue operating in the shadows, not unlike the committee itself, but with fundamentally different objectives and constraints. Reynolds left something for you, he said, retrieving a sealed envelope from his jacket. Said you'd understand its significance. Sarah opened the envelope, finding a single playing card inside the Queen of Hearts, the symbolic opposite of the Queen of Spades left at their base camp after Marcus's death. Where the spade represented death from afar, the heart symbolized life preserved through difficult choices. Accompanying the card was a brief handwritten note. The desert ghost now has a new mission. Truth is its own reward. Sarah returned the card to its envelope, tucking it into her tactical vest. The ghost reference acknowledged her new reality operating outside official defense channels invisible to conventional oversight, a phantom pursuing accountability rather than elimination. We should move soon, she noted, glancing at her watch. Committee will have facial recognition active on all surveillance networks in a 100-mile radius. Where to? David asked, ready to follow her lead despite the uncertain path ahead. Sarah considered the question, weighing tactical considerations against strategic objectives. The next phase would require different resources, different methods, a fundamental shift from military operations to something closer to counterintelligence. Washington, she decided finally, close to the investigations where we can monitor committee countermeasures and provide support to legitimate oversight efforts. David nodded, accepting the decision without question. His trust earned through their shared experience in the Nevada desert represented something the committee had sacrificed in its pursuit of unaccountable power, legitimate authority based on shared values rather than manipulation and fear. As they prepared to depart, Sarah paused to look back at the television where congressional leaders were announcing the formation of a special investigative committee with extraordinary authority to examine the allegations. The process of accountability had begun. Whether it would succeed against an adversary with decades of experience in manipulation and containment remained uncertain, but the first crucial step had been taken. The truth so long hidden in classified files and deniable operations had finally emerged into the light. Jack had taught her that a sniper's greatest weapon was patience, the willingness to wait for the perfect moment to take the shot. Sarah had learned that lesson well, perhaps better than he had intended. The shot she had taken wasn't with a rifle, but with information precisely targeted to create maximum impact where the committee was most vulnerable. As they left the motel room, disappearing into the anonymous flow of American life, Sarah carried with her the certainty that some battles must be fought not with weapons, but with truth, not for victory, but for accountability. The Desert Ghost had found a new purpose, one that honored the principles she had sworn to uphold when first donning the uniform of her country. The price of truth was high, but the cost of its absence had proven far higher. In the shadowy world between official directives and hidden agendas, Sarah Whitman had made her choice not between individuals, but between systems, between accountability and power unrestrained. And in that choice, she had found a clarity that no classified briefing, no compartmentalized operation, no appeal to necessity could provide. The clarity of purpose that comes not from following orders, but from following principles, even when the path leads through uncertainty and danger. The Desert Ghost had emerged from the shadows not to haunt the living, but to ensure that power, however necessary, remained accountable to the principles that justified its existence in the first place.